The sonar pinged into emptiness. Captain William Ironhand Carter leaned closer to the screen, watching the sound waves disappear into nothing. No return signal, no echo, just silence swallowing everything they sent out. "Run it again," he ordered. Petty Officer Rodriguez adjusted the frequency and triggered another pulse. The ping vanished into the void like a stone dropped into an endless well. Carter had spent 23 years beneath the ocean's surface, navigated through underwater canyons and beneath Arctic ice shelves, but he had never seen sonar simply stop working in open water. "Captain, I'm not getting equipment malfunction readings," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying an edge of confusion. "The system is functioning perfectly. There's just nothing coming back." Lieutenant Commander Hayes appeared at Carter's shoulder, his brow furrowed as he studied the blank screen. "That's impossible. We're at 400 meters. There should be thermoclines, fish schools, something." Carter straightened and looked around the control room. His crew moved through their stations with practiced efficiency, but he could see the tension in their shoulders, the quick glances exchanged between men who had learned to read the ocean's moods like farmers read the sky. They felt it too. Something was wrong. The USS Barracuda had been deployed to the Mariana region 3 days ago on a classified reconnaissance mission. Soviet submarine activity had increased in the area, and naval intelligence wanted eyes on the situation. Standard operation, routine patrol, nothing Carter hadn't done 100 times before. But 12 hours ago, they had entered coordinates that weren't on any official chart. A dead zone in the Pacific where radio signals couldn't penetrate and satellite communication cut out completely. Carter had reported their position before entering the zone. Standard protocol. Since then, they had been ghosts. "Helm, what's our current position?" Carter asked. Ensign Park checked his instruments twice before responding. "Sir, navigation is showing conflicting data. GPS lost signal when we entered this sector. Dead reckoning puts us approximately 200 nautical miles southwest of Guam. But," he hesitated, "the depth readings don't match any charts for this area." "What do you mean they don't match?" "Sir, according to our instruments, the ocean floor should be at 3,000 meters here. But our depth finder is showing something at 2,100 meters. A solid mass. And it's not a seamount or a ridge. It's flat, perfectly flat, like a plateau." Carter felt ice crystallize in his stomach. Natural formations didn't create perfect plateaus on the ocean floor. Sediment, current, geological activity. Everything underwater followed patterns of erosion and deposit. Flat meant artificial. Flat meant someone or something had built it. "Take us down," Carter said. "Slow descent. All stop at 500 meters." The Barracuda angled downward, her hull groaning softly as pressure increased. Carter watched the depth gauge climb. 420 meters, 440, 460. The water outside the observation ports darkened from midnight blue to absolute black. At these depths, no sunlight penetrated. They moved through a world without color, without reference points, guided only by instruments that were telling them increasingly impossible things. "Sir, I'm picking up something," Rodriguez said suddenly. "It's faint, but it's not natural. Structured sound, repeating pattern. Put it on speaker." A low hum filled the control room. It pulsed in a rhythm that was almost organic. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. But underneath the pattern lay something else. Harmonics that shouldn't exist in water. Frequencies that felt wrong against Carter's eardrums, like hearing a familiar song played in a key that didn't exist. "What the hell is that?" Hayes whispered. Carter didn't answer. He was counting the pulses, searching for meaning in the pattern. 3 and 3. Pause. 3 and 3. It meant nothing to him, but the repetition suggested intention, communication. Someone or something was broadcasting. "Source location?" Carter asked. "Directly below us, sir. Coming from that plateau." The descent continued. At 500 meters, Carter ordered all to stop. The Barracuda hung motionless in the water column, suspended above whatever waited below. Through the observation port, Carter could see only darkness, but he knew that darkness was lying to him. Something was down there, and it wanted to be found. "Deploy the ROV," he ordered. "Full camera suite. I want to see what we're dealing with before we get any closer." Chief Petty Officer Morrison moved to the ROV station and began the launch sequence. The remote-operated vehicle was their eyes and hands at depths too dangerous for divers, capable of descending to 3,000 meters with full camera and manipulator capability. Morrison guided it out of the launch bay and pointed it downward, its lights cutting through the blackness like surgical lasers. The control room fell silent as they watched the ROV's camera feed. Black water. Particulate matter drifting like snow in the headlights. And then, Mother of God, Morrison breathed. It rose out of the darkness below them. A city, not a ruin, not a debris field, but a city. Structures of dark metal and stone arranged in concentric circles around a central spire that climbed 200 meters from the ocean floor. Windows, or what looked like windows, dotted the buildings, and behind some of them, light glowed. Soft, blue-white luminescence that pulsed in time with the signal they had been hearing. Carter gripped the console so hard his knuckles turned white. His mind raced through explanations and rejected them one by one. Soviet installation. The architecture was wrong, curved and organic where Soviet design was angular and brutalist. Natural bioluminescence? Not at this scale, not with this regularity. Ancient ruins. Nothing in human history matched what he was seeing, and ruins didn't glow. "Sir, orders?" Hayes asked. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might draw attention from below. Carter's throat was dry. 23 years of naval service had prepared him for enemy submarines, for depth charges and torpedoes, for the 1,000 ways a man could die beneath the ocean's surface. Nothing had prepared him for this. "Continue ROV descent," he said. "I want close-up footage of those structures." Morrison guided the ROV lower. The city grew larger in the camera feed, its details becoming clearer and more impossible with every meter. The buildings weren't metal, Carter realized. They were made of something that looked like obsidian but caught the light differently, refracting it into colors that hurt to look at. The streets between them were empty, but they showed signs of use. Wear patterns in the strange stone, grooves that might have been made by vehicles or creatures or something else entirely. The central spire dominated everything. It twisted as it rose, a helix of dark material wrapped around a core of that same blue-white light. At its peak, the light concentrated into a sphere that pulsed like a heartbeat. Each pulse sent out the signal they had been hearing, sound waves that carried through the water and up to the Barracuda with mechanical regularity. "There's something moving," Rodriguez said. "Northwest quadrant, between those two larger structures." Morrison adjusted the ROV's camera. For a moment, Carter saw only shadows shifting in the artificial light. Then a shape resolved out of the darkness. Tall, bipedal, but wrong. Its proportions were stretched, limbs too long, torso too narrow. It moved with fluid grace along the empty street, and as the ROV's light swept across it, the creature turned. It had no face. Or rather, what should have been a face was smooth, featureless, like a head carved from the same dark stone as the buildings. But it saw them. Carter was certain of it. The creature stood motionless in the street below, its featureless head turned upward toward the hovering ROV, and it waited. "Pull back," Carter ordered. "Now!" Morrison's hands flew across the controls. The ROV began to ascend. But before it had risen 10 meters, the creature below raised one elongated arm. A pulse of light shot from its hand, if it was a hand, and struck the ROV dead center. The camera feed dissolved into static. "ROV lost," Morrison reported. "Complete system failure." The control room erupted into controlled chaos. Men shouted readings and status reports, hands moved across consoles, but Carter stood still in the center of it all, his mind locked on what he had seen. The creature had shot down their ROV with a beam of light. Impossible. Every part of this was impossible. "Captain, the signal has changed," Rodriguez said. There was fear in his voice now, naked and sharp. "It's not repeating the same pattern anymore. It's responding." The new sound that filled the control room was different. The rhythmic pulse was gone, replaced by something that rose and fell like speech. Alien syllables, if they could be called syllables, rolled over each other in patterns that suggested meaning without revealing it. Carter listened, and underneath his shock and fear, something else stirred. Recognition. Not of the sounds themselves, but of what they represented. Someone was talking to them. "All hands, battle stations," Carter commanded. "Helm, take us up. Emergency ascent." The Barracuda's engine roared to life, propellers biting into the water as the submarine tilted upward. The depth gauge began to drop. 500 meters, 480, 460. But as they climbed, a new sound joined the alien transmission, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the hull like a tuning fork struck against the ship itself. "Sir, I'm reading massive power buildup from that central structure," Rodriguez called out. "It's off the scale. I've never seen readings like this." The blue-white light at the top of the spire intensified. Through the observation port, Carter could see it even at this depth, a star being born in the darkness below them, growing brighter with each passing second. "Helm, all ahead flank, get us out of here." But before the helmsman could respond, the world turned white. Light exploded from the city below, a wave of energy that washed over the Barracuda like the shock wave from a nuclear blast. Carter was thrown from his feet, crashing into the navigation console as the submarine pitched violently. Alarms screamed, men shouted, and then, as quickly as it had come, the light vanished. Carter pulled himself up, tasting blood where he had bitten his tongue. Emergency lighting cast the control room in red shadows. Half his men were on the floor, picking themselves up or helping others. The main power was out. "Report," he called out. "All stations, report." Voices came back to him one by one. Morrison was down with a broken arm. Rodriguez was unconscious, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. Park was uninjured but staring at his navigation console in disbelief. "Sir," Park said, his voice hollow, "our electronics are fried. All of them. Navigation, communication, sonar, propulsion control. We have emergency battery power for life support and manual helm control. That's it." Hayes appeared at Carter's side, a cut above his eye streaming blood down his face. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "Bad," Carter replied. "We're blind and crippled at 400 meters with something down there that just took out every system we have." "What do we do?" Carter looked at his crew. Injured men, frightened men, men who had followed him into the ocean's darkest depths because they trusted him to bring them home. He thought of his wife waiting in their small house in San Diego, of his daughter who was about to graduate high school. He thought of all the letters he had written and never sent, all the words he had saved for later because there was always supposed to be more time. He couldn't give those men false hope, but he couldn't give them despair either. "Manual control still works," Carter said. "We ascend on battery power, slow and steady. We don't need sonar to go up. We just need to keep climbing until we reach the surface. Sir, without navigation, we have no idea where we'll surface. We could be hundreds of miles from any shipping lane, and without communications, one problem at a time, Lieutenant. First we get to the surface. Then we worry about being found." Hayes nodded, though his eyes still carried doubt. He moved away to organize the crew, leaving Carter alone at the center of the control room. The captain looked down through the observation port into the darkness below. The city was invisible now, its lights extinguished or hidden, but Carter knew it was still there, waiting. He gave the order to ascend. The Barracuda rose through the water column, her movements sluggish without full propulsion, but steady. Carter stood at the helm, watching the depth gauge with unblinking attention. 380 meters, 360, 340. Each number was a small victory, a few more feet between his ship and whatever civilization had built itself in the ocean's graveyard. At 300 meters, the lights came back. Not the submarine's lights, those were still dead except for emergency backups, but lights from below. Through the observation port, Carter saw the city reawakening, its blue-white glow returning section by section like a circuit board powering up. The central spire blazed brightest of all, its spiral of light, rotating faster than before, sending shadows wheeling across the ocean floor. "They know we're leaving," Hayes said. He had come to stand beside Carter, and his voice was steady now, the voice of a man who had accepted whatever was coming. "Yes." "Will they let us?" Carter didn't answer. He watched the lights below intensify, watched the spire's rotation accelerate until it became a solid column of illumination reaching up toward them. The alien sound filled the water again, those impossible syllables cascading over each other in patterns that might have been commands, might have been pleas, might have been something humans had no framework to understand. And then the lights went out. All at once, without warning or transition, the city vanished into darkness. The sound stopped. The pressure that had been building against the Barracuda's hull relaxed. Carter stood motionless, waiting for the next attack, the next impossibility, but nothing came. Only silence, only darkness, only the endless upward climb toward air and sky. "They let us go," Hayes said wonderingly. Carter shook his head slowly. "I don't think so." "Then what?" The captain looked at his hands, at the calluses and scars earned over 2 decades of service. He thought of the creature in the street, its featureless face turned up toward their ROV, with what might have been curiosity, might have been recognition. "I think we were the first humans they've met," he said. "I think they wanted to know what we were. And now they know? Now they know." The Barracuda continued to rise. 100 meters. 50. The darkness outside the observation port began to lighten, deep black giving way to gray, gray to blue. Carter could feel the pressure decreasing, could feel his ship struggling toward the surface like a dying animal dragging itself toward the water. At 20 meters, they broke into sunlight. Carter ordered the hatch opened and climbed the ladder to the top of the conning tower. The Pacific spread around them in every direction, empty and blue and infinite. No ships on the horizon, no aircraft overhead, just water and sky and the endless silence of a world that had no idea what lay beneath its surface. Hayes joined him on the tower, squinting against the brightness. "What do we tell them?" he asked. "Command? Intelligence? Anyone who asks what happened to us?" Carter considered the question. He thought of the city in the darkness, its lights and sounds and inhabitants. He thought of the technology that had disabled their ship with a single pulse of energy, the architecture that predated human civilization by millennia or eons. He thought of what would happen when that information reached the Pentagon, the White House, the hungry machinery of nations that turned every discovery into a weapon. "We tell them the truth," he said finally. "We encountered an anomaly that disrupted our electronics. We surfaced using manual control. We're awaiting rescue." "That's not the whole truth." "No, but it's enough truth for now." Hayes was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, understanding without agreeing, accepting without approving. He was a good officer. He would follow orders. They waited. 3 hours later, a Navy patrol plane spotted them and radioed for help. 6 hours after that, a destroyer arrived to tow them to port. Carter gave his report to the ship's captain, told the abbreviated truth, answered questions with half-answers. No one pressed him. A submarine losing power in the deep Pacific was unusual, but not unprecedented. These things happened. Equipment failed. Sailors survived. Life went on. But Carter knew that life would not go on the same way. Not for him. In his cabin that night, with the destroyer's engines thrumming through the deck beneath him, he took out a piece of paper and began to write. Not an official report. Not a letter to his wife. A record. A testimony. Everything he had seen. Everything he suspected. Everything he feared. At the bottom of the ocean, something waited. It had been there longer than humans had existed, building its cities, developing its technologies, watching the strange creatures who lived above the waves and slowly, gradually, spread across the world. Now those creatures had finally come knocking on its door. Carter didn't know if the inhabitants of the deep were hostile or friendly, ancient enemies or potential allies. He didn't know if they would rise to meet humanity or stay hidden for another 1,000 years. But he knew with cold certainty that the meeting he had witnessed was only the beginning. The deep zone was dead no longer. It was awake, and it knew they were there. Weeks passed. Carter returned to duty, took command of a new submarine, trained new crews for new missions. He told no one about the city except his written testimony, which he sealed and locked in a safe deposit box with instructions to open it only after his death. He attended briefings, read intelligence reports, studied charts of Soviet movements in the Pacific, and all the while, he listened. He listened for the signal. Sometimes, late at night, he thought he could hear it. That 3-beat pulse, that rhythm, like a mechanical heartbeat, threading through the static of radio communications and the ambient noise of the ocean. It was probably his imagination. It was probably nothing. But sometimes he wasn't sure. 6 months after the incident, Carter received new orders. A research mission, classified top secret, to investigate unusual acoustic readings in the Mariana Trench. The briefing mentioned anomalous structures detected by a survey vessel, possible Soviet installation, need for visual confirmation. Carter read the coordinates twice. They were different from the dead zone he had entered, but not by much, a few degrees of latitude, a few minutes of longitude, close enough to matter. He thought about refusing the mission. He thought about resigning his commission, taking his family somewhere far from the ocean, spending his remaining years on solid ground where nothing could pulse and glow in the darkness below. He thought about the creature in the street, its featureless face, its raised arm, the beam of light that could disable a submarine as easily as a man swatting a fly. He thought about all these things. Then he accepted the orders. 3 days later, he stood in the control room of his new command, the USS Swordfish, watching the depth gauge climb as his ship descended into the Pacific. Around him, his crew performed their duties with crisp efficiency, unaware that their captain was leading them towards something that would change everything they believed about the world. The ocean darkened around them, the pressure increased, and far below, in depths that had never known sunlight, something was waiting. Carter closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, a signal pulsed. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. It was calling him home.